I want to, in week 2, Jesus proclaims the fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecy. He outlines his purpose. He's doing that in his own hometown. Ched, the introduction to your new book, you mentioned how hard it is for us modern folk to turn to ancient wisdom for advice. And this is what Jesus is. He's turning to ancient wisdom, right? And saying it's fulfilled in our hearing. You say this in your book, and I'm just going to quote you because it's wonderful. Luke's accounts of Jesus' good news to the poor and warnings to the rich can inspire us to fight off the endemic illness of affluenza and stand up to the death sentence of plutocracy. So, thus your title, Healing Affluenza and Resisting Plutocracy. What did it mean for Jesus to proclaim that Isaiah's prophecy of good news for the poor was fulfilled in their hearing in this context in which he said it in his own hometown? And how is that medicine for what ails us today, as you talk about in your book?
I've been to Nazareth, and it stands on a knoll, and from there you can see down onto the plains where the ancient city of Sepphoris was. Sepphoris was an imperial city which Judean rebels attacked as part of their resistance to Rome right around the time that Jesus was being born. And then the empire struck back and rebuilt the city of Sepphoris bigger and badder than ever. It was about a 4-mile walk from Nazareth. So probably Jesus and his father, as construction workers, got jobs rebuilding Sepphoris. That's how oppressed people have to embody their alienation. So in this kind of context, right, the gospel doesn't take place in Disneyland. It takes place in an actual socio-political world. It's in this context of Roman occupied for centuries Palestine that Jesus delivers his inaugural public sermon. And he seems to choose Isaiah 61. It's a beautiful setup, which you as a theater person, Marcia, would appreciate. As was his custom, Luke tells us Jesus enters the synagogue. And then there's this careful choreography, dramatic gestures that communicate high drama, narrated in chiastic form like the opening and closing of a scroll. Jesus stands to read. The scroll is given to him. Jesus opens and finds the text. He gives his drash or his sermon. He closes the scroll. He gives it back and he sits down. The scene then focuses on 3 somatic portals of perception, each of which figure prominently in the rest of the gospel narrative. All eyes are fixed on Jesus. And note that Jesus adds to Isaiah 61 the phrase, recovery of sight the blind. Today, scripture is literally fulfilled in your ears.
Hearing, yes.
And all were astonished at the words of grace from his mouth. Seems to me that the question Luke is posing to his audience and to us preachers is, will we have eyes to see? Will we have ears to hear? Will we have voices to proclaim this good news? Jesus sits down, as preachers still do in the synagogue today, to deliver a drash, and gives one of history's shortest homilies in our longest gospel, right? It's often called a manifesto by commentators, reflecting what this preaching series calls Jesus' purpose. Many of us believe that Isaiah's acceptable year refers to the Levitical Jubilee, in which Sabbath economics equity is restored in communities that have become economically disparate through a program of releasing slaves, forgiving debt, and returning foreclosed land. Now, throughout the rest of Luke's narrative, Jesus' teaching, his demonstration projects, and his object lessons about wealth redistribution and social equity will both show and tell this jubilee, characterized in Isaiah 61 as good news to the poor. He's also about to denationalize it in his addendum, as week 3's text talks about. Today, this scripture has been fulfilled, Jesus announces, And in so doing, he's doing what Isaiah did with the Jubilee tradition. He's calling for an embodiment of a visionary text back in one's own context.
Yeah.
That's the prophetic hermeneutic of invoking a living tradition. It will prove to be controversial in this episode and throughout Luke's story. It remains so today.